What is up, everybody? This is Mr. Gridiron, aka Thomas Christopher of the League Winners. Here once again, we're at episode 8, and we have some interesting stuff for you today. We'll be breaking down some Steve Angeli film. We'll be talking about a potential split in the NCAA and a little bit more. Maybe we'll have a player interview for y'all as well. But before we get into all of that, please make sure you guys click that like button. It's completely free to do so, whether you're watching on X, Twitter, or YouTube or Facebook. I do appreciate everybody who tunes in. It means the world to me. If you guys are watching live, please sure to leave a comment if you're interested, either on a topic, something you want me to talk about, or questions or concerns that you may have. We cover high school through some NFL stuff too, primarily focused on some college football though. If you're watching on YouTube, click that subscribe button. It's completely free to do so. If you're on Facebook, make sure, and most importantly, make sure you guys share it. If you see this, come across it, share it. If you or your friends, family like college football, they're going to like this podcast / show, whatever we're going to call it. We talk a lot of that. We have some interesting stuff coming today. Like I said, potential NCAA split with the Big Ten. Might see the SEC involved as well. Who knows? We've got some rumor mills on that. And we're going to be breaking down some Steve Angeli film, quarterback of the Syracuse Orange. Steve actually tore his Achilles last year. He's expected to be good to go for the 2026 season, but we'll see. And we might have a player interview. We're kind of getting to the end of this cycle. I wanted to stop doing the NFL the college kids who just finished college and are going to the NFL. This will be the last week we do. Actually, next week, rather, will be the last few episodes where we highlight those kids before we switch over to high school and current college prospects and players. So before we get into all of that, though, let's get into our morning huddle.
Hit the ball! Let's go, family on 3! 1, 2, 3, family!
2, 3, fam. Oh, man, I love that. That being said, Brandon Sorsby files his lawsuit against the NCAA to play in 2026. As everybody knows by now, Sorsby has made major waves because of his gambling addiction, we'll have to call it. Sorsby was known to have gambled while he was at Cincinnati. I mean, just a lot of stuff going on with that, and Texas Tech also knew as well. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this shakes out, what Texas Tech does, whether or not Sorsby enters the supplemental draft for the NFL. Very fascinating stuff. Former Auburn head coach Tommy Tuberville has won the Republican nominee for governor of Alabama. We have the Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti claims 16-team college football playoff doesn't offer enough access, which that should be a forewarning for people talking about the 24 team as to why these conferences want the 24 team playoff instead of, we talked about this in prior episodes, instead of a potential 24 team playoff that has all the conference champions, we're going to likely see positions divvied up between some of the major autonomy conferences, and kind of the scraps are going to come based on what the AP poll probably looks like, if I had to guess. With that being said, the NCAA, continuing on, NCAA urges SEC athletes and fans to boycott college programs over voting rights complaints. I won't get into the politics of that, just as a news story. I try to avoid going in depth because nobody else wants to hear that. Clemson DT Heaven Brown Schuler is to undergo cancer treatment for his Hodgkin lymphoma. He's expected to miss the 2026 season. Prayers going up for you, Evan, and I really hope that everything goes okay. With that being said, that's going to lead to our final news story, and what's going to be our main segment of today's show is the Big Ten to explore self-governance as college football commission sputters. That's quickly the morning huddle, and let's get back into our news.
Hit the ball! Let's go, family on 3! 1, 2, 3, family!
Now, if you've been watching this show, in prior episodes, we've talked about the potential expansion of the college football playoff. But there's also the talks of a potential super league within the college football realm. And part of that is because of the major conferences in terms of the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC. They don't necessarily have faith in the ACC. Now, there's talks about primarily the Big Ten and the SEC splitting because of this. And now we're starting to see some of that rift start to continue now with the potential. And this is from, by the way, this article, I'm going to read off some of the article too that also talks about this is from Ross Dellinger from Yahoo, but we've already talked about this a little bit, but this just shows what kind of problems are going on, and a lot of it has to do with money. The headline of this article is potential split from the CSC, the College Sports Committee, on the table. Sports leaders struggling to find solutions to money problems. The Big Ten and the SEC should break away and do their own deal, which is something that we have talked about on here quite a bit. So now that and this is just shows, hey man, maybe this Thomas Christopher, Mr. Gridiron guy, he reads the tea leaves pretty well. I would like to say so, because looking at this, we're starting to see that happening faster than we've ever expected. The NCAA 7-year congressional lobbying efforts are reaching its climax as well, and their voting is scheduled this week for the momentum building for the bipartisan bill in the Senate. All the stuff that's been changing within the sport right now. There's also the new enforcement entity scrutiny of third-party deals from the NIL, which from the biggest above the cap spenders. So some stuff, that includes like the Ohio States, the Michigans of the world, and it threatens to cripple the league's wealthy behemoths by putting at risk tens of $millions they guaranteed to their players. There's a bunch of very interesting things that are going to be happening because of this, and because, the way that a lot of NIL deals are being set up, it's millions of dollars being promised to college athletes, and it's kind of getting trapped in a purgatory stance. And there's really nobody to enforce it at the top level. The House settlement, and this is Georgia President Jerry Moorhead told Yahoo Sports that the House settlement, which we've talked about before, has been nothing short of a disaster. All assurances from conference lawyers about this settlement solving any of our key issues have not materialized because of the loopholes around so-called third-party NIL deals, which are NIL deals that are not agreed upon between the major governing bodies and approved upon that. But now, what happens is, does that change? Do they write it? Do they create a new? Does the College Sports Commission get reformed in some way, or is the biggest answer, and something we've talked about already, do they kind of break away and start to form their own league? Whether or not that, I personally think, while that's not on the table right this second, I think it very much is on the table in the near future. I'm talking within 5 years, we might see much more rumors of this occurring because of a lot of the issues that the NCAA and the CSC rather are not handling correctly. There's so much that's going on. I mean, we've talked with head coaches too about this, right? With the 5-year, we can even go back to the transfer portal, right? And eligibility, right? We've talked to college coaches here on this show about how a 5-year eligibility was there for the NCAA to take care of and basically govern and set a precedent and a rule set. And they just sat on their hands, which allow, now we're having the 5-year mandate, like all that stuff that's been happening. A lot of that's because the NCAA didn't do anything, and now with the House settlement open paths for schools to directly pay athletes up, for a per school annual revenue share. I apologize, I tripped over my words. It allows high value third parties to pay them, and it doesn't, really affect what's going on, right? Certain high-value third-party pay to athletes from boosters and those affiliated closely with the university is prohibited, but the policy is direct conflict with the commission's own founders and operators, the P4, the autonomy schools. And they've been doing that forever. They promise athletes millions of NIL, and this is from Ross, by the way. This is a quote from Ross's article. Promise to athletes millions in NIL from multimedia rights partners, corporate sponsors, and apparel brands, some of which do not meet legitimacy standards. And that is one of the biggest issues that we're going to that we've already kind of starting to see, is that the legitimacy of some of these people that are going on and making these deals with these universities are not places that should be making deals with this university. They haven't been legitimized by the governing body. But part of that is because the NCAA doesn't necessarily do what they're supposed to do in that regard, and that is a massive problem for what the future of college football can hold, because if we have a governing body that isn't taking care of the needs of those within their governance, that's a problem. And that's something that the SEC and the Big Ten have already started to discuss. Now, the Big 12 is kind of more lax in that regard. And I know the ACC is kind of working hand in hand with the NCAA. But honestly, I think the ACC is more along the lines with the SEC and the Big Ten in terms of if it becomes an option for them to leave with those other two conferences for the betterment of their conference, I think they do it too. And I don't think they really second guess doing that. And this just falls back on the NCAA and their inability to really do much. I mean, a lot of issues have been, a lot of issues could have been stopped before they've become a problem with the NCAA, right? And we've already talked about in the past too. And this is Brandon Copeland, co-founder and executive director of Athletes.org, a college players association. He was talking about the NCAA and conferences were getting sued for violating antitrust by creating rules that limit athlete pay, right? So they're stopping athletes from getting the bag, we'll say, right? So the CSC is now doing the exact same thing, which the reason why the CSC was created was to make, change some of the aspects and kind of help where the NCAA wasn't necessarily doing anything. But now they're falling into that same thing, right? So what's going to happen to the CSC, Copeland says? That is a very great question because who knows? And right now, nobody really knows, right? There's a lot of stuff that's going on with the changing of the landscape in college football where nobody knows, right? That's what everybody else. Nobody knows what's going on. The NIL has made things crazy. Yes, that is true. But there's also ways that you can change that and cultivate how you're going to change that approach with the NCAA, and they're just not doing it, right? We've talked about the 5-year, the standard 5-year eligibility rule for college football. We talked about potential college football playoff changes. Payouts with NIL should be easy too, right? Like when it comes to this is where it gets kind of blurry because with how much money is getting involved in sports, do you separate college football specifically into a, feeder league for the NFL, which, obviously it is, but like, do you make that a professional feeder league? And how do you retain an athlete's, rights as a student because they technically, they still are student athletes, though that line can be very blurry. Depending on what programs they're taking in school too, right? We all know that there's certain classes that just count for credits and they don't necessarily do anything to further an athlete's education. How does that blurred line get solved? And we're kind of seeing issues where that on one hand, obviously as athletes, they have to have, or students rather, they have to have certain rights to maintain their education. But as athletes, there has to be some type of way for them to benefit from all the money that's being made. Now, I am 100% for players getting money. I'm 100% for the transfer portal being more open than what it is now. I think closing the spring portal, while it's great for the coaches and in that regard, it does hurt a lot of athletes. But what goes back to my point is there's a lot of things that the NCAA has to make decisions on. And they can't just continuously wait because the SEC, the Big Ten's, like where the profitable, and the others are profitable, but there's a lot of programs within the school, within those conferences rather, that are very profitable, and with how much money that they could seemingly make taking, Avenue B instead of staying on Avenue A with the NCAA, the NCAA has to start being precise with what they want to do. They have to be able to make decisions that are going to effectively answer the questions that are being asked in this new era. Another issue is the legitimacy of the NIL agents and just agents in general. Talking and working with multiple players, I've seen a lot of agents. I've seen great agents and I've seen some incredibly shady agents. I've seen family members that have pretended to be agents in order to get money from, their family member, their athletic family member who just happens to have a chance to bring his family out the dirt. I've seen people get taken advantage in that regard. I've seen agents take 30% of contracts, which is insane, and taking advantage of athletes in that regard. So there has to be some type of legitimacy when it comes to certifying agents, whether that's NIL or just agents in general, making sure that the validity of them is first and foremost the most important thing, and being able to set direct rules in place so that athletes are not being taken advantage of. That is my biggest problem. Personally, for me, that is my biggest problem, is because I think once we get some of that stuff situated, where that gray area between who's a real legitimized person, because the NFL doesn't have this problem, right? There's certain agents in the NFL that, they take more of a percent than others, etc. But there's also they're also, legitimized by the NFL. That has to happen at the college football level if we're going to start allowing managers and agents to make decisions for these kids. Otherwise, why are we allowing that to happen, right? And that's the case. There has to be some type of answer to that problem, and whether or not the NCAA has the cojones to do it remains to be seen. I hope that they do, because honestly, seeing a super conference and separating further of the FBS, where there's already that, autonomy and non-autonomy, imaginary split, right? Where that gets furthered along by the autonomy schools splitting off completely, forming a super league, which we've talked a little bit about, and then kind of leaving the rest to form that secondary league. I don't think that'd be great for the sport. I think and we're getting to a point now too, whereas football is a sport that does get probably, some of the most revenue for a lot of these universities. There has to be a different way. There is an ability to market things a certain way. And I know there may be some pushback on that. However, my thought process has always been, with the way that news and stuff is, you can make something marketable that shouldn't be marketable, or people won't think is marketable, right? That's happened plenty of times, right? And we're talking about teams. We're not talking about, a person who's, physically off-putting, or, has said something off-putting or something like that. We're talking about a university, that already they have ingrained fan bases already too, right? They have the alumni, they have just regular fans, whether it's from playing that, college football games, or just watching them on TV. You have TV platforms. There's a lot of ways that you can ingrain other programs and make them bigger. Now, some of those programs may still fail, on the smaller scale, small community. But if they get to a point where they increase the college football playoff, and you get conference champions from every conference in that playoff, you allow those markets to grow exponentially. Right? If it doesn't even have to just be the main market of that. It can include the secondary market where, let's just say, for example, some team in Ohio wins the conference championship. They get a shot at the college football playoff. A kid in Colorado who likes the logo, or likes a player's name on a team, or likes a player, starts becoming a fan of that team. Right? Or, there's so many stories and so many ways that you can increase the public eye of smaller programs and universities while keeping the integrity of the product and growing the sport as a whole. And that's where I feel like certain things get lost sometimes, and where I think the NCAA is kind of messing up and allowing these other, autonomy schools and conferences to try to make that escape, is because the NCAA just doesn't have many answers. And the answers that these other conferences and schools have is, hey, we want to go out and get our money for ourselves then. And it's an interesting thing, because it's hard to recognize what side is right and what side is wrong, because each has their points, right? The NCAA is kind of stuck in their ways. There was a system that was somewhat broken in the past, but they didn't necessarily have to worry about fixing it, because at the same time, things were just kind of handling themselves. Now they don't necessarily, especially in the digital age, the NCAA doesn't have that kind of leeway anymore, where they can just wait on decisions being made. That's just not possible. unfortunately for them. Now it's getting to a point when we just heard it that the Big Ten is, thinking about leaving, and the SEC has already thought about leaving, and it's only a matter of time before the ACC and the Big 12, who doesn't want to get left back, they will think about leaving too. So it's very important that the next few steps for the NCAA is about solving the issues that the autonomy conferences have. Otherwise, they're just going to leave the NCAA, form their own super conference, and then things become drastically different than what fans could potentially expect. Now, from a money standpoint, this is the most likely that is going to happen, right? We've already heard from multiple commissioners in the autonomy. We've heard from multiple, team presidents or, ADs, athletic directors, and coaches, a lot, especially in the autonomy. This is probably what is going to end up happening because there's so much more money to be made for these autonomy programs if they're more self-governing than having to deal with, the working with the NCAA, who at the same time allows, doesn't have much rules in place for outside entities to come in and kind of disrupt things. We talked about that with the NIL and just agents in general and some other money stuff that goes on. The autonomy schools, they want to be in control of everything, right? They want to be in control of and get more of the slice of the pie than anybody else. And that's understandable because they do make a lot of revenue as opposed to, let's say, like a Conference USA, which is more at the bottom of the totem pole. But with that being said, if the, it becomes interesting, right? Because nobody wants to see money lost, right? I think that's probably one of the biggest issues when it comes to, the bigger conferences is that money loss factor, right? They generate X amount of dollars, but they don't get to see their team in the playoff because the team wasn't good. Unfortunately, there's got to be, and this is where I think the sport is going to have a problem when they do create that, super league, is that you have to have integrity in the game as well, where the wins and losses and the schedule you make has to reflect and be a part of a potential postseason outlook. Then that's why we're seeing a lot of teams cancel their home and homes without, out of conference opponents and things of that nature. But personally, I'm not opposed to that happening. I'm not opposed to teams playing primarily within their conference to get, a stronger conference, And I think that the way that things are going right now, we're at a point where, because of this is all pushing in kind of one super league type of direction, that the NCAA has to be able to step in at some point and discuss whether or not they're going to be able to rein certain things in, whether or not they have a fluid and realistic plan in place, because let's just say plan A doesn't work for the NCAA. They have to have a B, C, D, etc. I mean, we talked to Scotty Rogers, VP of Communications of the Cotton Bowl last week, and he's talked about how important a plan B, C, etc. is, especially if the plan A doesn't work, and that's just for marketing and things of that nature, where the NCAA, I think, does an okay job and helps with that, but it's more of the actual logistics of the NCAA, like on the football side, and just the way that they've been handling money and certain other issues is where they've really fallen flat, and it opens the door for some of these power conference schools to, obviously, they're starting to question it. But even more importantly, we're seeing them now openly wanting and exploring the option of leaving the NCAA. And if you've been following me for a while, I've been talking about this for months, and now we're starting to see it actually happening in real time. So whether or not that happens, I think it happens sooner than later. You just have to hope that at some point the NCAA kind of gets it together and figures out what they're going to do for the future, because otherwise the future of the sport, the way that fans and people even growing up knew it, it's already changing. It's going to get a lot different, especially when the NCAA does find themselves on the outside of this conversation with the Big Ten and the SEC already looking to kind of want to get out of there, right? But it just makes for a fascinating story. That's why I'm grateful for people like Ross Dellinger, who reports on a lot of this stuff, because otherwise a lot of people just wouldn't know, and I do think that he's a great writer, and he's somebody that I think everybody should follow, Ross Dellinger from Yahoo Sports. But with that being said, before we get to our film segment, remember Wednesday shows are only from 8 to 9, not the 8 to 10. I do want to shout out another player interview, and that we'll be focusing. If you've been watching the show, by the way, we do a lot of player interviews. We try to highlight players as much as humanly possible. With the draft, just being a little bit less than a month ago, we still want to continue highlighting the NFL prospects who are now NFL teams are going, Canadian League or some of the other steps that they're taking. After this month ends, we will resume with high school prospects and current college players. But before we get to our player interview, make sure you guys are clicking that like button. It's completely free to do so. I appreciate everybody who's been tuning in, whether you're on X or Twitter, Facebook, or on YouTube. I truly appreciate it. This is a live show. Feel free to leave a comment if there's a player you want to talk about or an issue you want to discuss. If you watch this show after it airs, whether on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, or iTunes, and you want to leave a comment, feel free to leave a comment. Give me 24, 48 hours. I'll make sure that I get back to you on the following show. With that being said, this next player interview that we're going to be highlighting is a player that I am truly a big fan of. He's a very nice kid as well. He's now a quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. This player interview is going to be circled around Haynes King, former Georgia Tech quarterback. So with that being said, I'm going to full screen it on Haynes, and I hope you guys enjoy our conversation with Haynes at the Shrine Bowl.
Quarterback, Georgia Tech.
Kind of talk about your experience up to this point and how excited you are to be at an event like this.
Well, first off, I'm very excited and blessed to be here, and just to be able to compete against all these guys that are highly talented and very high on the draft boards and stuff like that. Just to be here and experience that, and then as well as being around the coaches, learning some of the language and things like that they speak. I know that's going to be the one of the big jumps as well, learning the languages of the offense and stuff like that. But I feel really good about this opportunity. First day, everybody was kind of running around like chickens with their head cut off, trying to figure out what they were doing and what everybody else was doing. But for the most part, it was a great experience.
Obviously, this is a long process, but as everything comes very quickly, is a lot of stuff that you have to personally intake and process. Whether it's playbooks, like you said, the language. What is there anything that you're doing specifically to kind of like center yourself while you're going through this?
Really, just be where your feet are. Control what you can control. You can't control. When you're on the field, the other 10 guys, what's going on. All you can do is try your best to do your job, especially when you have a short time period like this and only 6-7 days to do this thing.
When it comes to moving on to the next level, and especially at an event like this, everyone's learning a new scheme. A lot of guys may not have run these concepts at their previous school or location. Kind of talk about what that adjustment for not only you in the quarterback room has been, but also the running backs, receivers, and how much you are excited to learn more as you head throughout this week.
I mean, it's definitely a big adjustment, and like you said, you hit it with the receivers, tight ends, and running backs. Some people have been in the gun the whole time, and some might be spread, very simple. Stay on the same side for receivers wise, and then running back wise, they're probably offset, gun, more zone or counter or whatever it was. But now we might get under center, get an eye. Now they have to run zone. It's a different track from offset and, whether it's in the pistol or also, under center. So it's a lot of learning curves that have to happen in a short period of time. And, like I hit on it earlier, just keep controlling what you control.
Yeah, you've done a great job of that throughout your collegiate career. You're a very unique dual threat. So I just want to talk about like the culmination of your career. Like what has been your favorite moment leading up to this point?
I'd probably say the last 3 years, being at Georgia Tech, I wouldn't change my whole career for for anything because it's what led me here and got me to this point in my life. It's helped shape me to being the person I am today. But during those 3 years, I've learned a lot. Learned a lot about myself. Learned a lot about what you have to do to consistently be good and to even turn a program around.
A big part of these All-Star Game events too is building that camaraderie in a really short league, especially with the quarterbacks and wide receivers. You're going from a school where you may be working with a guy for multiple years to now you're trying to build that same type of relationship in a much more truncated amount of time. How have you gone about that process in terms of building that rapport and understanding how each wide receiver moves? Because some guys may be quicker at their breaks, some guys may be a bit longer. Kind of talk about that process and what it's been like through one day so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a learning curve for the most part. As a quarterback, you got to just keep trusting it and trying to hit the spot. And when you stay consistent with that, then it lets the receivers know this is where I need to be to catch this ball. And like you said, with it being a short period of time, you're going to have ups and downs with that. But you just got to work through it and find the best way possible.
And kind of building off that, I mean, every quarterback has either their favorite concept, their favorite route to run, their favorite play to run. What's yours and why?
At Georgia Tech, we ran a lot of three-level stretches. Whether it's flooding one side of the field or sending somebody from the opposite side, over the top, trying to tie somebody down. Usually those are pretty good, pretty simple to read, and has answers for a lot, whether it's man, zone versus pressure, stuff like that.
As guys head toward the next level, I love hearing about guys they may have modeled their game after, guys that they watch a lot. So as you are heading toward the NFL level, who's one guy that you've really tried to model your game after? And if not specifically model your game after, who's one guy that you've tried to take maybe something from their game and add it to your own?
Yeah, I'm one believer in everybody's unique, and you can't really just model your game after exactly one person. Uh, and growing up, I took a lot from like Tom Brady. Lately, like Lamar Jackson, just being able to extend plays, use his legs, and then Patrick Mahomes.
Now, what do you like to do outside of football? I mean, obviously football plays a big part of your life, but when you get time to cool back, relax, like what are your hobbies?
Yeah, I like to hunt and fish. Hunting wise, deer, duck, hog, a little bit of squirrel, uh, and fishing. Usually it's freshwater. Did a little bit of brackish water. Never really deep sea fished yet. Yeah.
Is that that off-field thing, does that allow you to be centered? Have you found that the more you've really found that balance, you've been able to become a better player as a result?
Yes, I'd say so. I'm not too outgoing of a person, so being in the woods and being at that kind of peace and quiet, kind of like you said, centers me, grounds me, and kind of recharges me.
And I guess kind of building off that too, like I don't want to say like a cheat meal, but when you're stray away from your diet perhaps or anything like that, is there any like go-to food that you like? Man, I really just want a bite of this right now.
Really, it's just home cooked meals. Whether it's going back or trying to get some Southern style, home cooked meal.
My last question for you, this week, it's a quick week, but it's also the start of a long draft process. So what are your main goals for this week, and what do you want to show NFL team?
You're all. Secondly, go out there and operate the best you can, control what you can control, and just do your job. Showcase your ability that you can operate in a pro style offense.
And I guess kind of building up on that too, like what is there anything specific that they've been teaching you here that the coaches at Tech and I mean throughout your high school and collegiate career haven't necessarily been able to teach you?
Uh, Not necessarily. I'm sure we'll figure out some stuff this evening. We have our you know meetings, and we're probably gonna watch first practice. So we'll probably learn a lot going through there.
Awesome. And before we get you out of here, brother, just let everybody know where they can find you on your social media if you have it.
Instagram. I believe the handle's Haynes King 13. Yes, sir.
Massive fan of Haynes King, quarterback from Georgia Tech, who is now with the Carolina Panthers. He was added there as an undrafted free agent. Big fan of King. And I think he's just such a down to earth kid, man. Hunter Fisher, we had a nice little chat about that after that interview we just showed you. So I do appreciate him for taking the time out for us at the Shrine Bowl to speak with us. I'm looking forward to rooting for him for his professional career. With that being said, if you're watching this episode, please make sure to click that like button. It's completely free to do so. I appreciate everybody who's watching out, whether it's on X, Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook. Remember, you can find this show anywhere you find your favorite shows or podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple with iTunes, Amazon, or iHeartRadio. Now we're at the bottom of the hour for the show, and we're going to probably talk about some other stuff. Maybe we have some of those, but no, I'm just kidding. We're hitting that film review, so make sure you guys enjoy it with the Film Room Flash. Yeah, man, that music gets me going. This week's episode of the Film Room Flash will feature Syracuse quarterback Steve Angeli, formerly from Notre Dame. Obviously, for those who don't know, Steve Angeli tore his Achilles last year after having one of the best he was having the best season of his career leading up to that injury, and it looked like Syracuse was going to be humming again. His injury happened. Syracuse fell off. And unfortunately for Steve, he lost what was going to be an excellent season for him. It also ended up hurting a lot of guys' seasons that year as well. Dan Villari, probably a player that was most impacted by Angeli's injury, considering how successful Villari was playing with him. And shout out to Villari, who's with the Los Angeles Rams. I think that's going to be fantastic for him too. But with that being said, we're going to get into this episode's edition of the Film Room Flash. And I want to give a shout out to Anthony Russo, who put this little cut up together on Twitter. So we're going to be using his film. Make sure you guys are following Anthony Russo at Anthony_Russo, RUSSO 97 on X/Twitter. I'll have his name briefly up on there before I go full screen and we'll start breaking down these plays. That's Anthony's right here. Make sure you guys find him at Anthony Russo 97. So with that being said, we're going to get into some film breakdown with Steve Angeli. I'm going to go full screen. For my audio-only viewers, I will try to describe this as in-depth as possible. That's kind of what I like to do. With that being said, let's get right to it. So the first clip we have here, and this is about 46 seconds. There's a few clips in here, so we'll go through each one. I know it's a little bit different than the one play we talked about before. But like I said, we'll also highlight, a couple players and plays as well. This one is against UConn. This was early in the season. Obviously, this is at the Dome in Syracuse. Don't remember the situation, but I was here for this game. This was one of the comeback games for Angeli. This kind of solidified him as the starter for Syracuse because there was a lot of people making rumblings for him to be replaced up to this point. And this was one of the great things that happened. Now, as we see, he's in a shotgun formation. I have the tight end on the left side here, running back to the left of Angeli. UConn is in a very, dynamic looking front. They have the nose right outside the nose here. And then they have two defensive ends playing out wide. They also have, multiple linebackers, and I believe that's a safety. I'd have to double check. All along and within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. Now, just based on the formation look alone, you can almost guarantee somebody's going to be coming. In fact, all of them end up coming, and we slow down. And these two run a stunt, then we'll call him the nose, even though he's lined up a little bit outside of the center. Him and one of the linebackers, they perform a stunt. And the offensive line here does a good job. The tight end does a fantastic job as well. Picking up that shoulder, nice little chip, does enough to get Angeli some room. Now, what Steve does here is interesting because he doesn't really have to worry much. This safety plays it terribly for UConn, unfortunately. He gets a little bit of delay. He plays a little too far back. This is an account of him probably not trying to leave this big area because obviously with all these men blitzing, he's most likely responsible for this massive area in front of him. However, with Angeli knowing that he doesn't necessarily have to worry, he's picking up the tight end here, defender that comes on the screen on the left. And Angeli still has plenty of room to throw. Nice lane too, nice window, perfect window, by the way. Between the right guard and the right tackle. Perfect throwing lane. And he catches his man. Perfect ball. I mean, the ball came so quick, I don't even think the receiver was expecting it like that. Good. Makes the catch, though. Goes right for the touchdown. Safety can't believe it. Cornerback, I don't know what the cornerback was doing. It looks like he just got beat, if we can see here. Yeah, looked like he got beat. A little bit of separation from the hands there. And they just go off to the races. One of the plays from Angeli that I really liked here, he knows where to go with the football based on the coverage. That's something I'm a fan of. Now, here we will see this is a completely different game. I believe this is the Clemson game. It's a game that it was Angeli's last game, actually. He got injured in this football game. But we'll talk about this play as well. Now, this is a little bit more of a bigger shotgun front, 2 receivers on the right side of the screen. Standard 5 offensive linemen here. They have a tight end here, and then they have another. We'll call him the Y, I guess. That's going to be going in motion. Running back is to the right of Angeli. It's going to be an RPO option. We have Clemson and kind of like a base-ish front here. Where they have two defensive linemen shading the guards, and then they have 2 edge rushers on the outside. One is over the tight end on the left. The other is outside the right tackle on the right side. We have 3 linebackers right there. Basically, easy 4-3 concept. We have what looks like is a boundary safety here. We have the free safety, probably strong safety there, closest to the box. Free safety in center field, and then we have the 2 cornerbacks down below. It's an RPO, from Syracuse. Interesting because Angeli's not the fastest mover. Good block pickup here from the moving tight. Let's see here. Good block pickup from the tight end who takes the right edge. We're going to see. Plays slow down again. Nice block pickup there. The 2 wide receivers, the outside receiver is going to do a little juke step, and he just runs an inside slant, nothing special. But it's just enough that this cornerback, the other inside cornerback, it stays flat-footed here on his guy, which is interesting, right? Slot receiver gets great speed. Not great on his stem there. That little hezzy does enough, though, to keep him guessing. And that just enough gets him open. And the speed, good speed, though. I don't know if the hezzy was a great move, but the speed was great. This is just a fast kid, I believe that's Daryl Gill, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to double check. But anyway, so run the RPO. Linebackers instantly pulled in. Not great discipline on their end from Clemson here. Even the strong safety at the top of the screen, he is also getting pulled in. Running back doesn't really have to do much. A little bit of a hold there from the tight end. Nothing crazy. But what's most impressive is, once again, I like to call Steve Angeli the man coverage killer, because when it comes to man coverage, man knows what he's doing. Goes in, already knows where he's going with the ball because of the coverage. The free safety doesn't move enough to this side. He moves too far down, right? So there's a free safety that's playing about 15 yards back from the line of scrimmage, right? Middle of the field. It's 2 wide receivers on the right side of the field. The outside receiver runs a quick in slant on the inside. And the inside wide receiver, he runs a nice little nice little stutter and go. Nice little zigzag route, playing some Madden. and it's man coverage, right? Man coverage on the back end. I mean, I don't know what the linebackers are doing because there's nobody in coverage there, but there's all like they're not going through a zone. They're also not blitzing. It's just bad play from the Clemson backers there, and the wide receiver just beats his man. He does that little hezzy just enough. The free safety at the top of the screen moves down and closer to the line of scrimmage instead of trying to protect that far end where the end zone is. And that gives Angeli in the Syracuse Orange just enough space to get that touchdown. Great route. I like the speed. The hezzy's good enough. And the speed is what kills, though, there more than anything else. Then we got the next play here. This is also now. I want people who are listening right now to realize and understand that not every film session is going to just be lauded with positives. This is going to be one of these plays where I think Angeli made a mistake, and I'll talk about why in a second. I believe this is the Tennessee game, first game of the season for Syracuse. Running in a shotgun. They have a slot receiver here. The film doesn't show if there's an outside receiver on that end or what the rest of the formation is stacked like. With that being said, it looks like Tennessee's in a dime-ish package. They got three down linemen. Then they have looks like three linebackers. They have two edges, quote unquote, and then they have a middle Mike. Now, this is where I have some concerns about Angeli, right? So they have one of the safeties here. I think that's 27-17. And then they have a defensive back that's shadowing the opposite receiver. So pre-snap, that's what it looks like. Post-snap, the defender who looked like he was shadowing the receiver goes right to his zone, right? He goes right to his zone. However, the right edge, we'll call him, is actually taking the tight end who is in that slot. Right? The Mike is blitzing, and the other edge, we'll say the left edge, also goes back in coverage. That safety that we saw, he's now playing high. So as it goes down, pretty good pocket. However, the tight end is wide open here. Wide open, and continue like the safety and the other defensive back are just they're not even in position. They're on their back foot, right? Instead of going there, Angeli goes to his other receiver that's not on screen at the line of scrimmage with a slant. It looks like that's an inside slant concept. And it connects. It does connect, right? I think that's to Jonte Cook, and Jonte gets to the 7 or 6 yard line. In and of itself, the results of this play are not bad. However, I think the decision-making leaves a little bit to be desired. And also, I think the ball is a dangerous ball to throw, especially at the NFL level. Now, like I said, pre-snap, it looks like, it looks fine. You don't know what these guys are going to do, but you know somebody's coming. It ends up being the Mike, so it's just 4 guys coming. 4 guys blitzing, attacking quarterback, attacking the line of scrimmage, whatever you want to call it. The running back picks up the mic there. Good job by Willis there. But the tight end's wide open here, and at about the 20-yard line with a lot of room to go. Said throws a little bit deeper. However, this edge, the edge who was taking the tight end, quote, in that zone, they're playing a zone coverage, by the way. Probably like a cover 3-ish, cover 4. I can't tell, but it's, a concept of that nature. Looked to me like it'd be like a cover 3, blitzing from dime with the linebacker there. They just changed the mic to blitz instead of one of the weak side guys. With that being said, this edge here, we'll call him the edge, the outside backer, is right there. Like if this is the NFL and this is the play concept, this is probably intercepted or tipped or deflected because he almost gets there. He's lucky that, the opening is there, but look how many defenders are here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 defenders here, 0 defenders by the tight end. And the yak ends up being okay because Jonte is a dog, right? Jonte is going to keep going. He hits him good. He hits him in stride, and the momentum gets them to the 6. However, I still firmly believe the right play is going to the tight end, who could have at least done the same thing, right? You expect the tight end to at least be able to maybe not break this tackle from the safety here, but you expect him to do enough where he's getting inside the 10 from there. It's just a safer throw. It's a safer throw within the concept because of you just see look how open this is, right? And I'll run it back a little bit more to the start. As soon as it goes, he's looking at this safety. He's looking at the linebacker coming in and the safety at the top of the screen who goes into his coverage. Once that happens, he's looking at this safety and sees him going back as well. So he knows he has the window for Jonte here. However, and by the way, this probably should have been a penalty because I believe that's a little bit more than 5 yards downfield by that linebacker. It gets chipped, just upsets the rhythm a little bit so that he can get to his own. Honestly, that chip is probably what allows him not to make a play on this football because he turns around a little late and Angeli decides to throw the ball. This is why Angeli threw the ball. It's because his head's not completely around. He's looking at the receiver right there. The linebacker is looking at the receiver, who's Jonte Cook. You'll see in screen in a second, who's coming from with the inside slot. And then he turns. The ball's already about to come out. If he turns around a half second sooner, this ball's intercepted. And this ball at the NFL level gets intercepted. Because, look, barely misses through his fingers. Jonte is there, hits Jonte in stride, but just look how much space is here for the tight end. He has so much room to run. The 20-yard line, he gets at least to the 10, right, with momentum. He could barrel in, but it's just a safer throw. It's one of my things where I'll call Angeli the man coverage killer, but he has a lot of work to do when it comes to zone coverage concepts and being able to diagnose zone coverages. He's just not great at it right now. And while this throw was successful, it is one example as to why I believe that. And we'll see the next clip coming up. Now, this is a fantastic. This is what I'm going to talk about where Angeli is a man coverage killer because the next clip is that Clemson game. Once again, Clemson has 2 down linemen, 2 guys on the edge. They have 4 guys within, in the box. They have playing man on the outside, and they have a high safety. So they're expecting, a heavy running attack with Yasin Willis at running back. You kind of probably would have expected Syracuse to do that as well, at least early in the season. They ended up not doing that. Instead, they run the RPO. He sees these guys get dragged in, understands it's man coverage off the rip. And this safety has almost an impossible job, right? Because you have to hope that the corner at the bottom or the corner at the top of the screen are able to keep their receivers, their opponents within line. And he has to kind of pick a side based on where Angeli's going. And there's not much leeway for him to do that here, right? The route is good, but he's covered. Angeli's already got this thing about to go in the air. And the ball placement here is what's special because you'll see it's high enough to where only Angeli's guy could get that. We'll play it again. So they run an RPO out of a shotgun set, man coverage. Angeli throws it with his receiver blanketed, but the ball is placed so well, it comes down for a touchdown. And there's nothing that Clemson defender could have done. Perfect ball placement. That's why I call Steve Angeli the man coverage killer, because he's just great. Now, the last clip of this little montage here, it's against UConn once again. This time, Angeli is under center. They have the tight end on the right side. They have, I believe that's Will Nixon at running back. A little 3-man front here by UConn with a nose tackle. They have a linebacker here. They have, I think you'd probably consider him a star. and then they have, 2 more players within an area of the box. It's an interesting 4-3-ish look from UConn. UConn runs a very interesting multiple defense. Anyway, post snap, the tackle, the nose tackle, and the left end, they run a stunt. And a very interesting play here by the UConn Mike, who starts to creep in. I think he just had bad eyes here, not being able to see that Nixon doesn't have the ball. They're running a play action. He gets sucked in by it, which I didn't think it was a great play action, to be honest with you. Sucked in, and he's playing catch up, and he's the one who gets taken advantage of. But that's not even his fault, because the cornerback gets absolutely destroyed by Daryl Gill on this route. So playing the concept here, it is a play action concept. Daryl Gill is on the far right side, running kind of like a staggered. It's not a slant-ish. It's a slant-ish concept that they like to run, and it's a zone coverage. Not a great zone coverage, but it's zone coverage. And what the biggest And what the biggest mistake here is that this safety, because there's so much discombobulation with this coverage scheme, like this guy doesn't know what the heck he's doing. He's playing laterally to the quarterback. He doesn't understand. This is a guy who doesn't understand his position on the field and is solely just playing this receiver, but he's not even really doing that, because you'll see him see the help here and go there. Now, this is probably what's supposed to happen if that concept comes that way, but it doesn't make much sense, because why do you have this guy in that zone here? Everything should be backed up a little bit more. Not saying that the safety is not responsible, but it just opens things up for what we're about to see, which is a massive play by Syracuse, because he finds Gill open. The Mike is not in a position, and it doesn't even matter, because the ball is going to where that safety probably should have been. And we see a 40-yard completion. Looks like 30-yard completion to Daryl Gill. We're going to run that back one more time. Like, the blocking here is great. Like, Syracuse picks up the stunt with ease. There's no issues at all picking up the stunt. One of the backers comes into, we call him edge backer. Like I said, UConn runs a very fascinating multiple defense. So in this clip, Steve Angeli is under center. It's a play action to Will Nixon. Tight end takes the edge. We'll call him the edge linebacker, no problem. They pick up the stunt perfectly. The other offensive lineman has no problem with his guy. Everything is going great for the Syracuse on the front end. For defensively, for UConn, a lot of confusion with their zone, right? We have this guy about around the 30-yard line who ran. This is actually funny. He's in cut, and this is what drives me insane, because this is the defensive back that's playing like this. You would expect the type of athleticism that this guy displays, and I'm not trying to single him out, but you would expect this guy to be like a linebacker or something, with how bad he was in this zone. Now, it looks like he's trying to pass this off to the safety here, right, with his little hand motion. This is a bad play by him, right? Because if I'm 90% sure, based on this play, that he is responsible for the zone here. The safety can pick up if he has to, but what's the biggest problem is it opens this massive part of the field, as we're going to see here. Like, all of this is wide open at the 50-yard line. Along the left hash, it's wide open. You can't expect the linebacker to make that type of coverage, to make up that type of ground. Instead, we see a very easy pitch and catch to Daryl Gill. Ball a little bit late in terms of getting to Gill. Probably could have been a touchdown otherwise by Angeli. I think he was surprised. There's a little bit of a pad on there. A little bit of surprise that Gill was probably that wide open. Like I said, this is just another bad. This is part of what led to UConn's demise in this game. As I said, Syracuse came roaring back and won this game in OT. But Like, this is just some of the bad plays we've seen here. I believe that's number 2. Yeah. If you're a defensive back, right, if your job is to play as a defensive back or cornerback, this is unacceptable from number 2. He's just continuously playing laterally, doesn't have his eyes on the quarterback at all. He's like mirroring the receiver without actually covering the receiver or trying to make a play on the ball. But the worst part about it is he's in a zone coverage. If you're doing this against man and you're trying to keep up with your guy, that is excusable to me. When you're in a zone coverage and you're playing with your back to the quarterback, especially, we're talking, 20, is this 10, 20 yards downfield at this point? Let's see, 10. This is, 10 yards downfield. Actually, we could even go higher, about 14, 13, 14 yards downfield. He still just has his back to the quarterback. Could he make a play on the ball? Potentially, but he leaves so much space right here, and the safety is going over to help. And he even beckons the safety to help. Like, he puts his arm out for the safety to come with him, thinking that that's going to be the play. Doesn't do it. Tries to pat him, making sure he's doing that. Leaves Darrell go wide open. Wide open, running deep crosser from the right to the left. About 30-yard gain. Just not a great play, man. Not a great play by UConn's defense. There's a lot of issues with it, but one thing you don't want to see is your defensive back playing lateral to the line of scrimmage. It's one thing if this play is going on the inside or something, but this is the problem with it too. You have a guy in zone coverage in front of you. We see this linebacker on the ACC marker here. He's in zone. You don't need to have your back to the quarterback. You back up into your zone, which I'm assuming would have been around this 40-ish yard line, right? You keep going. If it's a man mirror concept, that's even worse because he's not even playing great man coverage here either. We'll play it back, and we look at this side again. Look, like the linebacker's in coverage here. You do not need to be hugging the wide receiver like that. You need to be playing back further, moving into that zone on the left side, on that deep left side. Instead, he stays lateral to the line of scrimmage, as we're saying, but back basically completely turned. If Angeli throws this ball, he's not making a play on it. He's expecting the safety to come. He sees the safety here. Safety's trying to drift away. Instead, look at this. Because of how much space this guy gives, the safety is like, oh, wow, I have to get over here. You can just see it. You see him quickly. You see him hesitate. This is the thing. This is why I think it was 100% on this defensive back right here, because the safety is just drifting into his zone in that back end. And then you see him like, whoa, holy crap, I got to get going. Watch the safety right here. As the play goes, a space comes. He's like, oh, crap, I got to get over there. And Angeli does a little bit of a good job here to looking this way because of how poor this coverage is, that he also plays a part in it. Angeli's eyes do a good job moving. You can't see for sure, but because the goalpost is kind of in the way. But, okay, you can see it right here now. Angeli's eyes are like looking this direction, right? Just enough. And because this guy's not looking, he's not playing, the safety thinks that he's responsible to help on that end. Gives him enough room to look him off. Now he's over here. This whole field is wide open. This was one of the great plays by Angeli. This is where Angeli, like I said, I call Angeli the man coverage killer. He did a great job in zone here. I'll play it back one more full time. Play action. Poor coverage by the corner. Good look off by Angeli. Wide open Darrell Gill. Ball's a little bit late, doesn't lead him. Still, 30, 40-yard completion. Something you want to see there. I'm a big fan of that. And we'll run through all the clips now. We'll go full speed for you guys for all the clips so you guys can enjoy some Angeliness. Actually, these look like these are. It looks like one that's a little bit faster. We'll slow down. First play was the UConn. They go with blitz, stunt. Perfect ball. That's a beautiful ball. Only where his guy can get it. That's what I love about Angeli too, man. His ball placement is absurd. Fantastic. Another one here. Man covered, safety out of position. Speed kills, man. Speed kills. Another touchdown. That was against Clemson, a game that they won. This is the Tennessee game. Now, this is the one play where I thought Angeli could have done better. Throws, hits Jonte Cook, though, and gets within 6-yard line, 5-yard line. And we have another play against Clemson. Look at this ball. This is a beauty. Up high, only where his guy can get it. Beautiful. Love seeing that. Absolutely beautiful ball there with the upset over Clemson in that game. That was fantastic. And then the final one that we just talked about, the play action, looks off the safety, bad coverage by the corner, gets a wide open Darryl Gill for about 30, 40 yards. Beautiful stuff. Big fan of Steve Angeli. Very excited to see what he's able to do this season with the Syracuse Orange. Hopefully that he's fully recovered from his Achilles. I saw him in practices in the spring. He was looking a little hobbled. There's some stuff that he did at the spring game that was an error that made me have some concerns about his injury. However, he gets multiple months to continue to recover. My biggest thing is how is he going to look in the spring and summer camp. But before that all happens, let's just finish and wrap this up. The Film Room Flash. I hope you guys enjoyed that. All right, and that was our Film Room Flash segment where we'll look at a player, a plays, or we'll look at some head coaching schemes and concepts and try to break it down for you guys so you guys can understand that. I hope you guys truly enjoyed that. This episode was Steve Angeli of the Syracuse Orange, who will look to come back in 2026 and help lead Cuse out of the basement where they ended up finding themselves last year, which is disappointing because they really were doing a great job before Angeli went down from injury. He was having a fantastic year. Dan Villari, who's now with the Los Angeles Rams, he was having a fantastic career. Now Syracuse loses all their wide receiver talent that was basically here last year. In terms of Jonte Cook, Darryl Gill is no longer with the program either. They've moved on to other teams. So a bunch of new look faces for Syracuse, and let's just hope that Steve Angeli and his Achilles are healed enough to where he's actually able to make a difference for the Orange in 2026. But with that being said, Wednesday's show usually runs from about 8 to 9. We're a little bit past that right now. But with that being said, I know I just said that. Make sure you guys click that like button. It's completely free to do so. This is a live show. So if you leave a comment, I'll make sure to get back to you. If you're watching after the show airs, give me about 24, 48 hours, and I will make sure to get back to you as well. If you want a player that, if there's a player you want me to highlight or look at their film or break some stuff down, I'll make sure that I'll do that for you guys. I appreciate everybody who's been checking the show out. We're going to wrap this one up. We'll be back on Friday. We'll have some interesting stuff to talk about then. But with that being said, make sure you guys click that like button, click that follow button, and we'll see you guys on Friday. With that, this is Tommy Football, Mr. Gridiron.